The town of Dulce, New Mexico, sits on the Jicarilla Apache Reservation, high in the northern part of the state. Surrounded by mesas and empty desert stretching in all directions under a sky so clear and dark that the stars seem close enough to touch. In the autumn of 1987, this remote town became the center of something that would haunt the few witnesses who saw it for the rest of their lives. Thomas Blackwood ran cattle on his family's ranch 12 miles outside of town, land that had been in his family for 3 generations. He knew every draw and arroyo, every watering hole, every stand of scrub pine on his property. He knew when his cattle were content and when something had spooked them. And in late October of that year, something had definitely spooked them. It started with the mutilations. Thomas found the first one on a cold Tuesday morning, the frost still white on the grass. One of his best heifers, lying on her side in a clearing, dead. But not just dead. Mutilated. Her left ear was gone, removed with a precision that seemed surgical. Her eye on that same side had been removed as well. Cleanly, with no tearing of the tissue. And there was no blood. None on the animal, none on the ground around. The cuts looked like they'd been made with a laser, cauterized instantly. Thomas had seen enough death in his years of ranching to know this wasn't natural. This wasn't coyotes or mountain lions. This wasn't even the work of sick people, though that crossed his mind. The precision was too perfect. The lack of blood was impossible. He reported it to the sheriff, who came out and took photographs and filed a report that would go nowhere. The sheriff had seen this before. In New Mexico, especially in the northern part of the state, cattle mutilations were an uncomfortable reality that people preferred not to talk about too loudly. The second mutilation happened 3 days later. Then a third. Each one identical, surgical precision, specific. Organs removed, no blood, no tracks leading to or from the carcass. Thomas started sleeping poorly, waking up several times each night, listening to his cattle lowing nervously in the darkness. On the night of November 4th, Thomas woke at 2:17 a.m. to complete silence. No cattle sounds. No night birds. No wind. Just absolute, total silence, as if the world had been put on pause. He lay in bed, his heart pounding, every instinct screaming that something was wrong. Then the light came. It started as a faint glow outside his bedroom window, soft and blue-white, like moonlight but brighter, more focused. Thomas got out of bed and went to the window, pulling aside the curtain with a shaking hand. 3 lights hung in the air above his pasture, perhaps 100 feet up, perfectly motionless. They were arranged in a triangular pattern, and as Thomas watched, they began to pulse slowly in unison, growing brighter and dimmer in a rhythm that seemed almost like breathing. Beneath the lights he could see his cattle. All of them. Standing perfectly still in the pasture, arranged in concentric circles around a central point, not moving, not making a sound. It was the most unnatural thing Thomas had ever seen. Cattle don't organize themselves into geometric patterns. Cattle don't stand frozen like statues. The lights began to descend slowly, and as they got lower, Thomas could see that they weren't 3 separate lights but 3 points on a single massive object. A dark triangle, its surface somehow darker than the night sky. Around it, with lights at each corner. It made no sound as it descended. No roar of engines, no whistle of air. Displacement. Just silence. Thomas wanted to run, to hide, to do anything but stand at his window watching this impossible thing lower itself toward his land. But he couldn't move. His muscles wouldn't respond. He could only watch, his breath fogging the glass, as the craft settled into a hover about 20 feet above the center of the circle of cattle. A beam of light shot down from the center of the triangle, bathing the ground in that same blue-white radiance. And in that beam, Thomas saw them point 3 figures, descending in the light as if riding an invisible elevator down from the craft above. They were small, perhaps 4 feet tall, with slender bodies and disproportionately large heads. Even at this distance, Thomas could see their eyes, huge, black, almond-shaped, catching the light and reflecting it back like a cat's eyes in headlights. The beings reached the ground and moved among the cattle with purpose, examining them, touching them with long, thin fingers. The cattle remained absolutely still, as if hypnotized or paralyzed. One of the beings held up what looked like a tool of some kind, directing it at a cow, and the animal simply collapsed onto its side, still alive but unable to move. Thomas tried to scream, to call for help, but found he couldn't make a sound. His throat worked but no air would come. He was as paralyzed as his cattle, forced to watch as the beings methodically examined one animal after another. Then one of them turned and looked directly at his window. Directly at him. Their eyes met across the distance, and Thomas felt something in his mind, a pressure, a presence that wasn't his own thoughts. Images flooded into his consciousness. Vast star systems he didn't recognize, worlds spinning in darkness, cities built of material that seemed to be alive, and underneath it all, a sense of purpose, of mission, of something being studied and catalogued with the dispassionate thoroughness of scientists examining specimens. The being held his gaze for what might have been seconds or might have been hours. Time seemed to have lost its meaning. Then it turned back to its work, and the pressure in Thomas's mind released. The examination continued for an indeterminate time. Thomas stood at his window, unable to move, unable to look away as the beings moved among his cattle, occasionally using their tools, occasionally stopping to confer with each other in ways that involved no sound but seemed to communicate nonetheless. Finally, they returned to the beam of light and rose upward, drawn back into the dark triangle hovering above. The beam retracted. The lights pulsed once more, brighter than before, and then the craft began to rise, slowly at first, then faster, until it was just a point of light among the stars and then nothing at all. Sound returned to the world like a wave breaking. The cattle began to move again, milling about in confusion, lowing nervously. Night birds called. Wind rustled through the grass. Thomas collapsed onto his bed, suddenly exhausted beyond measure, and slept without dreaming until the sun woke him late the next morning. In the pasture, he found another mutilated cow, the work done with the same impossible precision as the others. But this time he understood what had happened. This time he knew what had taken them. He never reported that night to anyone. Who would believe him? Who could he tell that wouldn't think he'd lost his mind? Instead, he carried the memory alone, locked away in the deepest part of his thoughts, surfacing only in dreams and in those quiet moments when he looked up at the night sky and wondered if they were still watching, still studying, still conducting whatever research had brought them across the vast dark to his small patch of New Mexico desert. The mutilation stopped after that night. Thomas's cattle remained healthy and whole for the rest of his years on the ranch. But he never again slept soundly, and he never again looked at the stars without a shiver of recognition and fear, remembering those enormous black eyes, that presence in his mind, that certainty that humanity was not the only intelligence examining the mysteries of the universe. Sometimes, late at night, he would still see lights moving in unusual patterns in the sky above Dulce. But he kept his curtains closed now, and he tried not to think about what might be happening in those moments when the silence grew too deep and the night seemed to hold its breath. The universe was larger than he had ever imagined. And humanity, he now knew, was being watched by eyes that saw us as we might see specimens under a microscope. Interesting, worth studying, but ultimately just another form of life in a cosmos teeming with intelligence we could barely begin to understand. Take a moment to breathe. The universe is vast and silent. Somewhere beyond the stars, things are moving that were never meant to be seen. They don't scream. They don't chase. They wait. As your eyes grow heavier, remember, not every presence wants to be noticed. Some only watch. Let your thoughts drift into the darkness between galaxies, where time slows, and something might be drifting closer. Rest now. The next story is about to begin. Dr. Elena Vasquez had spent 3 weeks at the Norwegian research station in Queen Maud Land, Antarctica, conducting ice core samples to study ancient climate data. She was a glaciologist, comfortable with the isolation, the cold, the endless white landscape that seemed to erase the boundaries between earth and sky. But on December 18, 2003, her comfortable routine of scientific research changed forever when the ground-penetrating radar revealed something that shouldn't exist 2 miles beneath the ice. It started as an anomaly on the readings, a void space in what should have been solid ice and rock. The shape was too regular to be natural, too geometric, too perfect. Elena's colleague, Dr. James Reed from Cambridge, ran the scan 3 more times, checking and rechecking the equipment. The result was always the same. Beneath their feet, deep in ice that hadn't seen sunlight in millions of years, was a hollow space approximately the size of an aircraft hangar. The station commander, Captain Olaf Johansson, contacted their headquarters in Oslo, who in turn contacted various other agencies with interests in Antarctica. Within 48 hours, 3 more researchers arrived by plane, along with equipment for drilling and exploration. Whatever was down there, someone wanted to reach. The drilling took 11 days. They worked around the clock, the sound of the drill echoing across the empty ice sheet, white steam rising from the borehole to freeze instantly in the -50-degree air. Elena found herself unable to sleep for more than a few hours at a time, drawn repeatedly to the drilling site, watching the depth gauge climb higher and higher. On the evening of December 29th, the drill broke through into the void. Pressure sensors confirmed an open space below. The team gathered around the hole, their breath forming clouds in their thermal masks as they prepared to send down the first probe. The camera descended on a cable, its lights cutting through the darkness of a place that had been sealed away from the world since before human beings existed. The video feed showed ice walls at first, glittering in the artificial light, and then, "Stop," Elena said, her voice tight. "Go back." What was that? The operator reversed the cable, bringing the camera back up a few feet. The lights played across the wall of the chamber, and there, frozen in ice that should have been opaque but had somehow become clear, was a structure. Not a natural formation. A structure. All angles and surfaces, made of a material that was black with hints of deep purple, like metal but also like stone, or like neither, like something that didn't fit into any category of material science that Elena knew. It extended further than the camera could see, disappearing into the ice above and below and to both sides. "My God," James whispered. "Is that a building?" They spent the next hour maneuvering the camera, trying to understand the scope of what they'd found. The structure appeared to be enormous, a complex of interconnected chambers and corridors extending through the ice in all directions. The architecture was unlike anything in human history. Angles that seemed to shift, depending on how you looked at them. Doorways shaped for something that didn't walk on two legs. Symbols etched into walls, graceful and terrible, suggesting a language or mathematics completely divorced from human thought. And it was old. The ice that surrounded it dated back at least 15 million years. This structure had been here since the Miocene epoch, since before modern humans, before our ancient ancestors, before anything resembling human intelligence had existed on Earth. The question that no one wanted to ask, but that hung in the air like the mist from their breath, was simple. Who built it? They widened the borehole over the next 3 days, making it large enough to send a person down. Elena volunteered immediately, as did James. Captain Johansson selected 2 others, Dr. Sarah Kim, a xenobiologist, who'd been studying extremophile bacteria, and Marcus Hoffmann, a German engineer responsible for their equipment. On January 3, 2004, Elena descended into the void for the first time. The rope lowered her slowly, her headlamp cutting through the darkness, the walls of ice glittering around her, like a tunnel through diamond. She could hear her breathing inside her thermal suit, could feel her heart racing, despite her attempts to remain calm and clinical. Then the ice opened up and she was in the chamber. It was vast. Her light couldn't reach the far walls. The structure loomed around her, emerging from and disappearing into the ice like a ship frozen in the moment of sinking. She could see corridors leading away in multiple directions, see rooms or spaces whose purpose she couldn't guess, see those strange symbols glowing faintly with a light that had no source she could identify. Glowing. The symbols were glowing. In ice that had been dark for 15 million years, something was still producing light. "Elena? What do you see?" James's voice crackled in her radio, made thin by the distance and the ice. "That it's intact," she said slowly. "Preserved perfectly. And James, some of it is still active. There's light. I don't know how, but there's light." She landed on solid ground, a floor made of that same strange material as the walls and unclipped from her. The floor beneath her feet felt stable, more solid than the ancient ice that surrounded it. She took a few experimental steps, her light sweeping across the space. That's when she saw the bodies. They were in one of the side chambers, visible through a doorway whose shape hurt to look at directly. It approached slowly, her scientific curiosity warring with a more primal urge to flee, to get back on the rope and never return to this place. There were 3 of them, or at least 3 that she could see. They had been large, perhaps 7 feet tall when they stood, with bodies that were vaguely cylindrical but segmented like they wore armor, or perhaps that was their skin. Multiple limbs, 6 or 7 each, ending in appendages that might have been hands but with too many fingers, too many joints. Their heads were angular, with what might have been eyes or sensors or something else entirely, dark and empty now. They had died here millions of years ago, in this structure they had built so far from whatever they called home. Elena thought about that, about beings capable of crossing the stars, of building in Antarctica when Antarctica had been somewhere else entirely on the globe, warm perhaps, or at least not buried under miles of. They had come here for some purpose, had built this place and had died here, far from home, entombed in ice for longer than human civilization had existed. "I've found the builders," Elena said into her radio, her voice barely above a whisper. "They're dead. Been dead for." The lights brightened suddenly, the symbols on the walls pulsing with increased luminosity. Elena spun around, her heart hammering as the chamber filled with that strange light. "Elena? Your readings just spiked. What's happening down there?" The floor beneath her feet vibrated, a low hum that she felt more than heard. The bodies of the ancient builders remained motionless, but around her, the structure was waking up. Responding to her presence perhaps, or to heat, or to vibration, or to some other stimulus she couldn't understand. Panels on the walls began to glow, displaying what might have been text or data in that alien script. The doorways pulsed with light around their edges. And from somewhere deeper in the structure, Elena heard a sound, low and rhythmic, like machinery coming online after a sleep of millions of years. "I'm coming up," she said, moving quickly back to her rope. "Something's happening. The structure is active." She clipped onto the rope and signaled to be pulled up, rising away from the chamber floor as the lights grew brighter and brighter around her. The hum increased in volume and frequency, filling the space, vibrating through her bones. As she rose through the borehole, back toward the surface, she looked down one last time at the structure below. The lights were now bright enough that she could see more of it, could see the true scope of what had been built here. It extended not just through the chamber they'd discovered, but through the ice for what might have been miles in every direction. A vast complex, a city perhaps, or a research station, or something that had no equivalent in human experience. And it was active. After 15 million years of silence, human presence had triggered something, woken. Something, started some process that might still be running according to protocols written by minds utterly unlike our own. When she reached the surface, the other researchers helped her away from the hole. Captain Johansson was already on the radio with Oslo, his voice tense, reporting what was happening. That night, as Elena lay in her bunk unable to sleep, she felt the ice beneath the station vibrating, so subtly that she might have imagined it. But she knew she wasn't imagining it. Down below, the structure continued. Whatever process her visit had initiated. The station was evacuated 3 days later on orders from several governments that claimed jurisdiction over Antarctica. The borehole was sealed with thermite, melting it closed, burying the structure once again beneath 2 miles of ice. But Elena knew that didn't matter. The structure was awake now. Whatever intelligence had built it had left something behind, some fraction of itself, some capability that endured across millions of years. And it was active now, thinking whatever thoughts alien machines think, pursuing whatever purpose it had been designed to pursue so long ago. Sometimes when she looked at maps of Antarctica, she imagined lights glowing beneath the ice, imagined corridors and chambers waking up one by one, imagined those ancient builders' final project continuing its work. In the darkness, patient and alien and utterly indifferent to the curious primates that had briefly disturbed its rest. The universe was old, far older than humanity. And in that vast age, others had risen, had built, had traveled to distant worlds, and had left their marks in places we were only beginning to discover. Antarctica held secrets. Beneath its ice, secrets that suggested we were not the first intelligence to call Earth home, only the most recent, and perhaps the most temporary. Take a deep breath with me now. In through your nose, slowly filling your lungs completely. Hold it for a moment. And now release it through your mouth, letting go of any tension these stories have created. Notice how you're feeling. Notice the weight of your body against your bed, the warmth of your covers, the familiar comfort of your own space. These stories exist in the realm of imagination and possibility, but you are here, solid and real and safe. Let's do another breathing exercise together, one that will help calm your nervous system and prepare you for the stories yet to come. Breathe in for a count of 4. 1, 3, 4. Hold for 4. 1, 3, 4. Breathe out for 6. 1, 3, 4, 5, 6. Hold empty for 2. 1, 2. Repeat this cycle 2 more times at your own pace, letting each breath carry you deeper into relaxation. The stories we're exploring tonight touch on humanity's oldest questions. Are we alone? What exists beyond our world? What intelligences might be looking back at us from the vast dark between the stars? These questions can feel overwhelming in their scope. The universe is so large, so ancient, so filled with possibilities that we can barely begin to imagine. But there's comfort in that vastness too. It reminds us that we're part of something infinitely larger than ourselves, part of a cosmos that has existed for billions of years, and will continue for billions more. As you listen to these tales, let them wash over you like waves. Some details will stick, others will fade. That's natural. That's good. You don't need to remember everything. You only need to let the rhythm of the words, the flow of the narratives, guide you deeper into rest. Your eyelids may be growing heavy now. If they are, let them close. If you prefer to keep them open, that's fine. There's no right or wrong way to experience these stories. They exist to serve you, to help you transition from the waking world into the world of sleep and dreams. In the next story, we'll visit West Virginia in the 1960s, a time and place where something strange appeared in the sky and in the shadows, something that brought messages and warnings and questions that have never been fully answered. But before we go there, take one more deep breath. Feel yourself sinking deeper into your mattress. Feel your muscles relaxing, one by one, from your toes to your legs to your core to your shoulders to your face. You are safe. You are comfortable. You are exactly where you need to be. Let's continue our journey through the strange and unexplained. Point Pleasant, West Virginia, was an ordinary town in most ways. Situated where the Kanawha River meets the Ohio River, it was a place where people worked hard, knew their neighbors, and didn't expect much excitement beyond the changing of the seasons and the occasional flood when the rivers ran high. But in the autumn of 1966, something came to Point Pleasant. Something that would haunt the town for over a year, that would appear to dozens of witnesses, that would culminate in tragedy and questions that remain unanswered to this day. They called it the Mothman. The first sighting occurred on November 12, 1966, when 5 gravediggers working at a cemetery near the town reported seeing a figure in the sky above the tree line. Not a bird, they insisted. Something man-shaped, but with wings, gliding between the trees without flapping, moving with an intelligence and purpose that no natural creature possessed. 3 days later, 2 young couples driving past an abandoned TNT plant from World War II encountered something that would change their lives forever. Roger and Linda Scarberry and Steve and Mary Millette were driving Linda's '57 Chevy just after midnight, talking and laughing, the radio playing softly. As they passed the old power plant, Roger noticed something standing in the shadows of one of the abandoned buildings. "Slow down," he said to Linda, who was driving. "What is that?" The figure stood perhaps 7 feet tall, gray-brown in color, with a vaguely humanoid shape. But as the headlights swept across it, they all saw what made it impossible, what made it something that shouldn't exist. Its eyes, red, glowing red like reflectors caught in headlights, but too bright, too intense, too alive. And wings. Enormous wings, folded against its back, too large for any bird, shaped wrong for any flying creature that evolution had produced. The figure turned toward them, and even from 50 feet away, they could feel the weight of its gaze. "Go," Steve said urgently. "Linda, go." Linda pressed the accelerator and the Chevy leaped forward. But as they sped away, looking back through the rear window, they saw it rise into the air. Not with any visible effort, not with the labored flapping of wings, but with a smooth, effortless ascent, as if gravity meant nothing to it. And it followed them. They drove at speeds up to 100 miles per hour on the winding country roads back toward Point Pleasant. Behind them, keeping pace effortlessly, the creature glided through the night sky, its red eyes visible in the darkness like 2 points of burning light. "It's not losing ground," Roger said, his voice tight with fear. "We're doing 100 and it's keeping up." Mary was crying in the back seat, Steve holding her, both of them watching that impossible thing chase them through the night. Linda drove faster than she'd ever driven, her knuckles white on the steering wheel, taking turns that should have sent them careening off the road. Only when they reached the outskirts of town, where street lights began and houses lined the road, did the creature veer away, ascending straight up into the night sky until it disappeared from view. They went directly to the police. Sheriff George Johnson listened to their story with growing concern, not because he thought they were lying, but because he believed them. He'd lived in Point Pleasant all his life, and he knew these were good kids, not prone to pranks or drugs or hysteria. Something had genuinely terrified them. Over the next 13 months, more than 100 people would report seeing the creature. Some saw it standing in fields at night, its eyes glowing in the darkness. Others saw it flying overhead, its massive wings spread against the stars. Some reported that it appeared in their dreams, or that they felt watched when walking alone after dark. But the most unsettling reports came from those who claimed the creature communicated with them. A woman named Connie Carpenter reported waking one night to find the creature perched on her roof, its face visible through her skylight. Those red eyes had stared down at her, and she'd heard a voice in her mind, not speaking English but somehow making itself understood. It showed her images, the silver bridge that connected Point Pleasant to Ohio, the bridge collapsing, cars falling into the icy water, people dying. She reported this to the authorities, but what could they do? The bridge had been inspected. It was safe. The vision must have been a dream, a nightmare brought on by all the talk of strange creatures in the night. Others reported similar communications. Visions of disaster. Warnings of catastrophe. A sense that the Mothman wasn't there to hurt anyone directly, but rather to deliver a message that no one wanted to hear. John Keel, a journalist who came to Point Pleasant to investigate the sightings, spoke with dozens of witnesses. Many reported other strange phenomena accompanying the Mothman sightings. UFO lights in the sky, men in black suits asking questions and making veiled threats, phone calls wherein human voices spoke in garbled prophecies, electromagnetic interference that caused cars to stall and lights to flicker. It was as if the Mothman's presence had thinned the barrier between the normal and the paranormal, had opened a door through which strangeness could flood. And then, on December 15, 1967 at 4:58 p.m. during rush hour, the Silver Bridge collapsed. 75 vehicles were on the bridge when it failed, 46 people died in the icy waters of the Ohio River. The collapse was eventually attributed to a stress fracture in a single eye-bar in the suspension chain, a flaw that had grown over years of use until the entire structure came down in seconds. But those who had seen the Mothman, those who had received its warnings, knew that something more was at work. The creature had known, had tried to warn them, had appeared again and again over 13 months, showing people visions of the disaster that was coming. After the bridge collapse, the Mothman sightings stopped. The creature was never seen again in Point Pleasant. Whatever its purpose had been, it seemed to have been fulfilled, or perhaps abandoned once the tragedy it had warned about came to pass. Years later, researchers and ufologists would draw connections between the Mothman and other phenomena. The creature's ability to fly without apparent effort, its glowing eyes, the electromagnetic interference that accompanied it all suggested something not of this earth. Some theorized it was an alien entity, a scout or observer from another world. Others thought it might be something stranger, a creature that existed partially outside our normal space and time, able to perceive future events and attempting, in its limited way, to communicate warnings to the humans it encountered. John Keel, in his book about the events, suggested that the Mothman might be an ultra-terrestrial, a being from a dimension or reality parallel to our own, that had somehow crossed over into our world. He noted that similar creatures had been reported throughout history, in cultures around the world, always appearing before disasters, always bearing that same aura of otherworldly dread. Linda Scarberry, one of the first witnesses, never spoke much about that night after the initial report. But in a rare interview many years later, she said something that stayed with everyone who heard it: its eyes saw right through you. Not through your body but through time. Like it was seeing you now and seeing you in the future. And seeing everything that would happen all at once. That's what made it so terrible. Not that it was monster. But that it knew. It knew everything and it couldn't save us. The Silver Bridge Disaster Memorial stands in Point Pleasant today, with the names of all 46 victims engraved in stone. And near the town center, there's a statue of the Mothman, wings spread, eyes blank instead of red, transformed from a harbinger of doom into a tourist attraction. But the older residents of Point Pleasant, those who were there in 1966 and 1967, don't like to look at that statue, because they remember the real thing. They remember the feeling of being watched by something that understood the universe in ways humans couldn't begin to grasp. They remember the warnings that went unheeded. And sometimes on quiet nights, some of them still report seeing lights in the sky above the town moving in ways that aircraft don't move, hovering in ways that nothing natural can hover. They wonder if the Mothman is still out there somewhere, watching from whatever dimension or reality it calls home, observing humanity with those terrible knowing eyes, perhaps bearing warnings about futures we cannot prevent and disasters we cannot avoid. The mystery of Point Pleasant remains unsolved. Explanations have been offered: misidentified birds, mass hysteria, hoaxes. But none of them fully account for the consistency of the reports, the number of credible witnesses, or the eerie accuracy of the warnings that some people received. Perhaps some things are meant to remain mysterious. Perhaps some visitors from beyond our understanding come bearing messages we're not equipped to receive, warnings we're not wise enough to heed. Perhaps the universe is stranger than we can imagine, and the Mothman was only one small manifestation of that strangeness, briefly visible, briefly communicating before returning to whatever strange realm spawned it. The sky above Point Pleasant looks like any other sky now. But those who know the history, who remember or have heard the stories, sometimes look up at night and wonder what else might be watching, what other entities might be observing our small human dramas from perspectives we cannot fathom. And in the quiet moments before sleep, when the mind drifts between waking and dreaming, some of them still see those red eyes, glowing in the darkness of memory, seeing forward and backward through time, knowing what was and what will be, bearing witness to the strange and terrible beauty of a universe far larger and stranger than we typically allow ourselves to believe. Take a moment to breathe. The universe is vast and silent. Somewhere beyond the stars, things are moving that were never meant to be seen. They don't scream. They don't chase. They wait. As your eyes grow heavier, remember, not every presence wants to be noticed. Some only watch. Let your thoughts drift into the darkness between galaxies, where time slows, and something might be drifting closer. Rest now. The next story is about to begin. Sarah Mitchell lived in a comfortable suburban home in Connecticut with her husband David and their 7-year-old daughter Emma. Their lives were ordinary in the best possible way: steady jobs, friendly neighbors, a garden that Sarah tended on weekends. Nothing prepared them for what began on the night of June 21st, the summer solstice. Sarah woke at 3:33 a.m., the numbers on her alarm clock glowing in the darkness. She didn't know what had woken her. No sound, no bad dream that she could remember. Just a sudden transition from sleep to wakefulness, complete and total, as if something had flipped a switch in her mind. The room felt wrong somehow. The shadows were too deep in the corners, too solid, as if they had substance, rather than being simple absences of light. The air felt thick, charged with static electricity that made the hair on her arms stand up. She turned to wake David, but he was sleeping unnaturally still, his breathing too slow, too regular, as if he was unconscious rather than merely asleep. She reached out to shake him, and her hand passed through something cold and electric before reaching his shoulder. He didn't respond to her touch. That's when Sarah saw the light under the bedroom door. Blue-white, pulsing slowly, brightening and dimming, like something breathing. She felt pulled toward it, compelled in a way she couldn't explain or resist. Her rational mind screamed at her to stay in bed, to hide under the covers like a child, but her body moved of its own accord, standing, walking toward the door, opening it. The hallway was filled with that blue-white light, sourceless and all-encompassing. At the end of the hall, standing in front of Emma's room, was a figure. It was small, perhaps 4 feet tall, with a disproportionately large head and enormous almond-shaped eyes that caught the light and reflected it back with depths that seemed to go on forever. Its skin was gray, smooth, with a quality that was almost luminous. It had long, thin arms ending in hands with too many joints, fingers that seemed fragile but somehow looked capable of impossible precision. The being turned to look at her, and Sarah felt that gaze like a physical weight. There was intelligence there. Vast intelligence, but alien, operating on principles and priorities that had nothing to do with human emotion or understanding. "Emma," Sarah tried to say, but her voice wouldn't work. No sound came out when she opened her mouth. The being raised one hand, and Sarah felt her body stop moving, frozen in place while her mind remained completely alert and aware. She could only watch as the being turned back to Emma's door and passed through it, not opening it but simply moving through the solid wood as if it wasn't there. Sarah stood paralyzed in the hallway, screaming silently in her mind, unable to move or speak or do anything to protect her daughter. Time seemed to stretch, seconds becoming hours, the blue-white light pulsing in rhythm, with a heartbeat that wasn't her own. Then the being emerged from Emma's room, and behind it came Emma herself, walking with the same compelled motion Sarah had felt, her eyes open but unfocused, like a sleepwalker. The being led Emma down the hallway, past Sarah who could do nothing but watch in horror, toward the stairs that led down to the first floor. Sarah felt the paralysis release as they passed, and she followed, her movements still not entirely her own but at least able to respond to her desperate need to stay with her daughter. Down the stairs they went, Emma walking mechanically between two of the gray beings now, a second one having appeared from somewhere. The front door stood open and beyond it, the street was bathed in that same blue-white light. Sarah could see, now where it was coming from, a disc-shaped object hovering silently above the road, perhaps 30 feet in diameter, perfectly smooth, rotating slowly as it maintained its position. A beam of light extended from the bottom of the disc to the ground, and in that beam, Sarah saw other figures. Other gray beings, 4 or 5 of them, and 3 other people from the neighborhood. Mr. Chen from 2 houses down, the Richardsons' teenage son Marcus, and old Mrs. Kowalski from across the street. All of them standing motionless in the beam, their faces blank, their eyes reflecting that terrible light. The beings led Emma toward the beam, and Sarah found her voice returning enough to scream, a sound that came out as barely more than a whisper, "No. Please. Not my daughter. Please." One of the beings turned to look at her, and she felt its thoughts in her mind, not as words but as concepts, as certainties. They meant no harm. This had happened before. This would happen again. Emma would be returned. This was necessary. This was important. This was something humans could not understand but must accept. Emma stepped into the beam of light, and Sarah watched as her daughter began to rise, floating upward toward the disc above. The other people were rising too, all of them ascending at the same steady pace, drawn up into the craft by forces Sarah couldn't see or comprehend. "No," Sarah said again, and this time she could move. She ran toward the beam, intending to grab Emma, to pull her back down, to do anything to keep her daughter with her. But when Sarah entered the beam, the world changed. She was no longer on her suburban street. She was in a room, circular, with walls that seemed to be made of pearl or opal, surfaces that shifted color as she looked at them. She was lying on a table that conformed to her body, supporting her but not restraining her. Above her, one of the gray beings looked down with those enormous eyes, and beside it was something else, something taller, with different features, perhaps another species or perhaps the same species at a different stage of development. They examined her. She felt their instruments, if that's what they were, passing over her body. There was no pain, but there was a profound sense of violation, of her most private self being observed and catalogued. They were inside her mind somehow, reading her memories, her emotions, everything that made her Sarah. She saw Emma in her mind's eye, lying on a similar table in what might have been an adjacent room or might have been light years away. Her daughter was calm, sleeping or sedated or simply held in whatever state allowed the beings to do their work. And Sarah saw more, memories that weren't hers, or rather were hers but had been suppressed, pushed down into the dark places of her psyche where she wouldn't normally access them. This wasn't the first time. She had been taken before. Many times before. Since childhood. The scars on her arm that she'd always attributed to a bike accident, the missing hours during her college years that she'd blamed on drinking, the dreams of lights and examinations that she'd dismissed as nightmares. All of it real. All of it this they showed her why. Not in words but in images and feelings that poured into her mind. The beings had been watching humanity for thousands of years. Guiding. Studying. Conducting some vast experiment or program that spanned generations. They took genetic samples. They implanted something, small devices or perhaps altered DNA. They created hybrid children in laboratories aboard their ships. They were preparing for something or preparing humanity for something, a purpose so vast and complex that Sarah's human mind could only grasp fragments of it. And then, as suddenly as it had begun, it was over. Sarah woke in her bed, David sleeping peacefully beside her, dawn light coming through the window. She sat up, her heart racing, and immediately went to Emma's room. Emma was asleep in her bed, looking peaceful and normal. Sarah stood in the doorway watching her daughter breathe, trying to convince herself it had all been a dream. But when Emma woke an hour later and came downstairs for breakfast, she had a small mark on her arm, a perfectly circular bruise no bigger than a pencil eraser. And when Sarah asked her if she'd had any dreams last night, Emma looked at her with eyes that seemed older than 7 years old and said, "The visitors came again. Mommy. They're getting ready for something big. They told me I'm important. That we're all important." Sarah checked with the neighbors later that day. Mr. Chen had no memory of the night. Neither did Marcus Richardson or Mrs. Kowalski. But all of them had the same small circular mark on their arms. All of them had woken feeling strangely exhausted, as if they'd been awake all night. And when Sarah looked up at the sky that evening, watching the stars appear as the sun set. She knew with absolute certainty that the visitors would return. They always returned. This program, whatever it was, had been running for longer than human civilization. It would continue long after. Humanity was being shaped, guided, prepared for something. Whether that something was benevolent or malevolent or simply beyond human concepts of good and evil, Sarah couldn't say. But she knew she was part of it now, acknowledged as part of it, her awareness of the pattern, making her somehow more valuable or more useful to whatever vast purpose drove the beings who came in the night with their lights and their examinations and their hybrid children growing in tanks aboard ships orbiting in the darkness above. That night before sleep, Sarah held Emma close and whispered, "Whatever happens, I love you. You're mine. And I love you no matter what they do or what they want." Emma hugged her back and said, "I love you too, Mommy. But they say I'm theirs too. They say we all are. They've been watching us forever and they'll keep watching us until it's time." Time for what? But Emma didn't answer, and soon she was asleep, her small chest rising and falling with peaceful breaths. Sarah lay awake long into the night, watching the stars through the window, wondering which point of light hid the vessels of the visitors, wondering when they would return, wondering if she would remember the next time, or if they would hide the memories again beneath layers of false dreams and manufactured certainties. The communion had occurred. Contact had been made and sustained and repeated across years and generations. And humanity, for all its technology and understanding, remained the subject of the experiment, not the experimenters. We were being studied, catalogued, altered perhaps, for purposes we could barely begin to understand by intelligences that regarded us with the same cool scientific interest we might direct toward bacteria in a petri dish. Outside, the stars shone with innocent beauty, hiding their secrets, keeping their watchers invisible against the dark. Take a moment to breathe. The universe is vast and silent. Somewhere beyond the stars, things are moving that were never meant to be seen. They don't scream. They don't chase. They wait. As your eyes grow heavier, remember, not every presence wants to be noticed. Some only watch. Let your thoughts drift into the darkness between galaxies, where time slows, and something might be drifting closer. Rest now. The next story is about to begin. Dr. Michael Torres had devoted his life to listening to the stars. As the lead radio astronomer at the Arecibo Observatory in Puerto Rico, he spent his nights analyzing signals from deep space, searching for patterns in the cosmic noise, hoping to find evidence of intelligence beyond Earth. For 15 years, he had found nothing but the expected: pulsars spinning in the void, quasars blazing at the edge of the universe, the background hiss of radiation left over from the Big Bang itself. No messages. No artificial signals. No signs that humanity had company in the cosmos. That changed on October 3, 2009, at 11:47 p.m., when his equipment registered a signal unlike anything he'd ever seen. It was narrowband, precisely calibrated to a frequency that shouldn't occur naturally. It pulsed in a pattern that was clearly structured but not immediately decipherable. And most importantly, it was strong, far stronger than it should have been given the apparent distance of its source. Michael's hands shook as he verified the signal, running check after check to rule out satellite interference, equipment malfunction, terrestrial radio sources. Every test confirmed the same conclusion: this was coming from deep space, from a region approximately 247 light-years from Earth, from an area of the sky that contained no known pulsars or other natural sources that could explain the signal. He should have immediately reported it to his colleagues, activated the protocols for potential SETI discoveries, contacted the international community of astronomers. Instead, he did something he would later struggle to explain. He kept it to himself. There was something about the signal that felt personal, directed, meant specifically for him. He knew this was irrational, knew that a signal from 247 light-years away couldn't possibly be targeting one specific individual on Earth. But the feeling persisted, grew stronger the longer he listened. Over the next 3 nights, Michael recorded the signal continuously, filling terabyte after terabyte with data. The pattern repeated with absolute precision every 17.3 hours, but within that repetition were subtle variations, complexities that suggested layers of information he hadn't yet accessed. That he began to lose sleep, spending every available hour working on the signal, trying different decoding methods, running the data through programs designed to identify mathematical structures, linguistic patterns, any kind of organized information. On the 4th night he found the first layer. Buried in the apparent noise between the main pulses was a secondary signal, phase-shifted and nearly imperceptible unless you knew exactly how to look for it. When Michael isolated this secondary signal and ran it through a Fourier transform, it resolved into images. The first image was a map. Not of any geography he recognized, but a star map showing constellations from a perspective that wasn't Earth's, with one star highlighted, circled, marked as significant. Michael Cross referenced it against every stellar database he had access to and identified the highlighted star. It was our sun. Seen from approximately 247 light-years away, from the precise region where the signal originated. The second image showed a planet. From the atmospheric composition suggested by color banding and the presence of what looked like liquid water, Michael guessed it was an Earth-like world orbiting in the habitable zone of whatever star system the signal came from. This was their home, perhaps the world of the beings who had sent this message. The third image showed beings. They were not humanoid. Six-limbed, with body plans that suggested they had evolved in higher gravity than Earth's. Their heads or sensory clusters were arranged in ways that made no immediate sense to human eyes. But they were clearly intelligent, clearly technological, clearly capable of understanding mathematics and physics well enough to send signals across interstellar space. The fourth image showed a timeline of some kind, a series of marks or symbols arranged in a pattern that suggested a count or a sequence. Michael worked on this for hours before realizing what it represented: years. Not Earth years, but orbital periods of the home planet translated into a count. The timeline showed 1,247 marks. The signal had been sent 1,247 years ago in the sender's time. Given the distance and accounting for the differences in orbital periods, Michael calculated that the signal had been sent approximately 1,100 Earth years ago, sometime around the year 900 AD, when humans were building castles and fighting with swords, when our most advanced technology was water wheels and sailing ships. The beings who sent this message had been capable of interstellar communication when humans were still in the medieval period. They had looked up at their sky, found our sun among the billions of stars, and decided to reach out across the vast gulf to see if anyone was listening. The fifth image was where things became disturbing. It showed a structure, enormous, artificial, clearly technological. The scale was hard to judge without reference points, but Michael estimated it was at least the size of a small moon. The structure was in motion, shown in a series of frames that suggested trajectory, purpose, direction. And its path led to the planet, the home world of the beings who sent the signal. The sixth image showed the aftermath. The planet was dark now, its atmosphere stripped away or altered beyond recognition. The structures visible on its surface in earlier images were gone. The world was dead, reduced to a lifeless rock in the course of what might have been days or years. The timeline was unclear. The seventh image showed the structure moving away, continuing on its trajectory through space, heading in a direction that Michael traced on his star charts with growing dread. It was heading toward Earth. Or rather, it had been heading toward Earth 1,100 years ago. If it maintained its course, if the scale and speed he estimated were correct, it would arrive in our solar system in approximately 150 years, give or take a few decades. The eighth and final image showed an equation. Mathematical, precise, elegant. Michael recognized it immediately as a formula for energy generation, but operating on principles that went far beyond current human physics. It was a weapon perhaps, or a power source, or simply a description of what the structure used to accomplish its purpose. The message was clear. The beings who lived 247 light-years from Earth had detected something approaching. Their system had observed it destroy their world, and had sent out a warning to anyone who might be listening. The structure, whatever it was, moved from star to star, systematically destroying inhabited worlds. And it was coming here. Michael sat back from his workstation, his mind reeling. He should report this. He should share the signal with every astronomer, every government, every organization that might be able to do something about a threat that wouldn't arrive for another 150 years but was already, in a sense, too late to stop. But who would believe him? The signal was complex, yes, but it could be misinterpreted. The images could be artifacts of his decoding process. The timeline could be wrong. It could be wrong. He spent the next week working obsessively, barely eating or sleeping, trying to find more layers in the signal. More information that might clarify what he'd found. And he did find more layers, each one deeper, each one requiring more sophisticated decoding. The ninth layer showed other solar systems, Other worlds, all dark and dead, all destroyed by the structure. Trail of devastation crossing thousands of light years, spanning potentially millions of years. The 10th layer showed something that made Michael's blood run cold. Equations describing the structures. Propulsion system, its ability to move between stars, and a calculation of its arrival time in our solar system. The calculation matched his own estimate almost exactly. 147 years from now, give or take a decade. The 11th layer showed humanity. Earth, seen from space, clearly recognizable. The beings who sent the signal had observed our world somehow, across 247 light-years, had noted its atmospheric composition, its orbital characteristics, its suitability for life. They had known we existed or existed as a potential haven for life, and had sent their warning to us specifically. Michael stopped coming to work during the day. He told his colleagues he was sick, needed time off, would be back soon. He worked on the signal from home, his apartment filled with printouts and computer screens, displaying star charts and equations. The 12th layer appeared on his screens 2 weeks after the initial detection. It was a message finally decipherable as language now that Michael understood the mathematical framework the senders were using. We are dying. Our world is dying. We cannot stop what comes. We see you across the void, small blue world, and we know you are like us. You build, you dream, you look up at the stars. You will face what destroyed us. We cannot save you, but we can warn you. Prepare. Build. Find a way to survive. What comes cannot be reasoned with, cannot be bargained with. It has no malice but no mercy either. It is ancient and purposeful and unstoppable by any force we could muster. Perhaps you will have better fortune. Perhaps your science will surpass ours. Perhaps you will find what we could not, a way to protect your world from what moves through the galaxy, harvesting energy from stars and destroying any civilization it finds. We hope you receive this. We hope you survive. We hope some remnant of intelligence persists after we are gone. Remember us. Remember that we tried. Remember that we warned you. The structure comes. Prepare. Michael read the message over and over until the words lost meaning and became just shapes on his screen. He thought about reporting it, thought about the panic it might cause, thought about whether 150 years was enough. Time for humanity to prepare for something that had destroyed a civilization potentially more advanced than ours. In the end, he archived the signal, encrypted it with codes only he knew, and deleted his working files. He returned to work the next week, told his colleagues he'd recovered from his illness, and resumed his normal duties, scanning the sky for signals that might indicate intelligence beyond Earth. He never told anyone what he'd found. The knowledge lived inside him like a stone, heavy and cold, a certainty that humanity's days were numbered, that somewhere in the vast dark between the stars, something ancient and vast was moving toward us with the patient inevitability of gravity itself. At night, before sleep, he would sometimes pull up the archived signal and listen to its complex patterns, imagining the beings who had sent it, long dead now, their world a cold cinder circling a distant star. He wondered if they had dreamed, as he now dreamed, of escape, of finding some way to survive the unsurvivable. He wondered if humanity would do any better when our turn came. And he listened to the stars, knowing now that they were not silent, that messages moved through the void, carrying warnings and epitaphs and desperate hopes cast into the dark by civilizations facing their end. The universe was not empty, but it was not safe either. And we, humanity, for all our confidence and expansion and dreams of the stars, were just another brief candle waiting for something ancient and indifferent to blow us.